Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session will begin shortly.
All right. Good afternoon. How we doing? Yeah? All right. Good workshops? Yes, good ed chats, podcasts, training. Good. Well, this is one of the centerpieces of the conference, and I know this is one that you've been waiting for yourselves, because there's probably no global discussion that is burning more brightly than the one about how we measure what we know and what we care about. And one of the big global learning metrics that we know is shaping a lot of the policies that we are dealing with in governments and in classrooms is PISA. So what we have done is we have set up a discussion and put a lot of time aside for it to go deep into these issues. So we know that there's a lot. This is an open discussion. I know John's going to turn it open to you guys in a second, but let me just tell you about who's moderating this. John Banks has been for EI since its beginning an incredibly important pillar of our organization, of the Secretariat. He is the chair of the Trade Union Advisory Committee to the OECD. For those of you involved in the International Summits on the Teaching Profession, he works tirelessly week after week in organizing and negotiating those. He advises many of us on OECD matters. He goes everything from deep education policy to talking about the moral purpose of schools. When I first met him, I was introduced to him by his past general secretary. This was about 10, 11 years ago. And he was told, he's like, be careful, he's a total radical. So without further ado, let me introduce you to John Banks, our total radical. Thank you.
Oh, David does these amazing introductions. I think they should be in a small handbook. I think they're wonderful. Look, this afternoon is about fun and engagement, okay? And I want to thank Yuri, because the OECD is noted for its highly complicated Prezi or PowerPoints, but Yuri is not using any. She's in favor of iteration and dialogue with the audience. And so is Stefan as well, because that's what this afternoon is about, actually. The title is What to Do About PISA. I will do a formal introduction to both, and we're all very grateful to both for taking part in this, because You know, I mean, the late afternoon is a bit of a graveyard slot, and our task is to keep everyone awake. So, you know, we understand, of course, if you fall asleep, but it won't be our fault. Okay, let me introduce Stefan first. Stefan Handel is the president of UEN. And I think it's fair to say he's an education president. He really is engaged with all the massive issues in Norway over education. And he's out there in the media and the press having a crack on behalf of his members. So, you know, what better person to get involved in such a fundamental debate? And Yuri Belfali I'm really grateful to her for coming to the summit, because she's to the conference. I mixed the summit and the conference up there. The conference, because not only is she doing this, but she was involved in Mary's panel this morning, which was a fascinating discussion, and also came along to the HeartsCam session at lunchtime, and also another session on global competencies. So Yuri has been working all day. She's the head of the schools division, and also, which includes early years at the OECD, and I think project manager for PISA. I think that's right, isn't it, Yuri? So, you know, no one better qualified than these two to actually discuss the issue. I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction, but not too much. Why should we care about PISA? Well, PISA, the Programme for International Student Assessment, is the preeminent global assessment of education systems. And it originally started in 2000. The first report came out then. And I think 43 countries, by my count, were involved. I thought it was just OECD countries, but it wasn't actually. There are a whole load of countries that took part from the beginning that weren't in the OECD. By 2015, by my count, probably my counting's wrong, Yuri, it was 71, and then 2018 we're up to over 80. So why we care is that it's becoming, as I say, self-evidentially the preeminent evaluation system of education systems. So it's now well over double. And what's salutary is that now more countries outside the OECD take part in PISA than OECD countries. It's an assessment of 15-year-olds on using and applying knowledge, includes contextual questionnaires as well as the assessment instruments, and the contextual questionnaires include questionnaires to parents, students, principals, and now on a voluntary basis or an optional basis to teachers, and it's published once every 3 years. You can read about the OECD description of PISA on its site. You just have to go to the front page and then put in about PISA, and you'll find out about it. There is also a new book out, actually. This is where I give a puff to the Alberta Teachers Association, who sponsored the book, and I know Phil's here, by Sella Thompson and Rakowski. The Global Education Race review is on our review by Martin Henry and I is on the EI website, and to pitch in with the debate, Stefan's already put something in there as well. So, you know, it's hot, the website, on this. Well, you go to the front page of the EI website and you click on Worlds of Education. In fact, you can do it now in an idle spare second. Now, I just want to say a little bit about the trade union role in relation to the OECD, because I think it's important. A lot of you won't know it. The OECD is probably the oldest example of a social partnership, structural social partnership that there is. Its predecessor was formed as a result of the Marshall Plan straight after the Second World War. And inside it, after some tough negotiation between President Truman and Ernie Bevan, the UK Foreign Secretary at the time, it was agreed that as a structural part of the OECD, there should be a trade union advisory committee as well as a business advisory committee. And therefore, and that's my role as chair of the working group on education as part of the Trade Union Advisory Committee. That's part of that reform. So for those of you who haven't been to TUAC, I would recommend, if you're in an OECD country, do come. It's good stuff. But EI is represented through TUAC on that particular group, but EI also has a bilateral relationship with the OECD itself. And in fact, actually, we have our own EI OECD Advisory Committee, chaired by Randy Weingarten, Executive Board member. And there are all sorts of things that we have done in terms of talking to the OECD, a couple of projects at the moment. We've got as a result of the Executive Board decision, AFT and the NASUWT pressed hard for this, and it was accepted unilaterally by the Executive Board. There's an agreement for a special project on teacher well-being and stress. We've also had a recent discussion with the OECD about its procurement process. For example, there's some examples there of our bilateral relationship. Well, why should we talk about PISA? It's about how governments use PISA results in its country rankings. PISA certainly has policy effects, and if you go to the OECD site, you can see two examples of those policy effects, citing Germany and Brazil. But there's another issue here, and in a sense, personally, I'm relieved that actually the idea that we should have a single metric evaluating the Sustainable Development Goals invented purely for evaluating the Education Sustainable Development Goal, I think that's off the agenda, but David may know more about that than me. The fact of the matter is, though, that in support of the SDGs, I know OECD is playing a big role in relation to that, and PISA is going to be contributing to that. I think I would finish by saying that, I mean, you can ask me about what the EI's relationship is. We have a strong relationship. We're on the PISA governing body. We're constantly in touch. I don't think it's whether or not it's a formal supportive role is not the issue. The issue is it is there and we are engaged. And I think what's concerned us, and I know Fred said this and various other people have said this over time, there's a turn against, in a sense, a global approach both to the Sustainable Development Goals, against all sorts of things. We're returning to a poisonous nationalist populism, and I think the question is do evaluations like PISA, TIMSS and PEARLS enhance education globally, or do they undermine it? And that is an interesting question for us. Now, this is what's going to happen. Stefan and Yuri are going to have 10 minutes each, and then I'm going to put my hands in front of my eyes to actually cut out the blinding light. And I want some real active engagement. There are going to be two roving mics, and we need a conversation, a really good conversation about PISA and global assessment up until 5 o'clock. So, let me start then with Yuri.
Thank you.
Over to you, Yuri.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank John and EI for this opportunity to have a conversation on PISA issue, but also I'd like to reiterate OECD's thanks to EI for your very active contribution to the development and analysis of PISA. And you gave me a challenge to speak without PowerPoint or statistics. And for the OECD, talking without statistics is like fish out of the water. So I will do my best. But actually, probably maybe I should start by saying who I am. Actually, I am not statistician, I'm not economist, but I consider myself educationalist. I have been working in the field of education, mainly focusing on education policies, and I understand the value of quantitative data, but at the same time, in my previous professional life, I worked a lot in the area of more ethnographic research to understand the reality of teaching and learning. So I hope I can bring balanced view in terms of the use of different types of evidence, but also to talk about PISA from OECD perspectives. And why I'd like to talk about PISA, and to do that, I would like to remind ourselves why we are here and why we want to talk about PISA as one of the instruments that we might want to consider to achieve our common goal, which is, I guess everybody is agreeing, that we are getting together to talk about the quality of education. But for me, quality of education is giving all children, first of all, the experience of joy of learning, but also the quality of education so that all these children, as I mentioned in the morning session, regardless of their background, have a chance to develop the competencies, skills, but also the dispositions to become what they want, to meet their full potential, to help them prepare their future life and job, to contribute to the well-being of themselves, but also the whole society. Why I tell this? Because PISA has a potential to respond to this question and also give contribution to this very ambitious goal that everybody share. Let me start with some of the areas where I see the potential of the PISA and the use of PISA. First of all, PISA could provide information to build the debate on policies and practices based on the evidence. But at the same time, PISA could shed light on the reality of students, how they are doing, how they are feeling, what they are struggling with, what kind of support they need. So this is one way of listening to what children are facing and to have an international picture of the educational issues seen by children, by teachers, and other people who participate in the questionnaires. PISA has been, from the beginning, also creating kind of debates, shocks, surprises, and this could be considered as a myth-breaking exercise. Sometimes in the education field, we have strong beliefs or philosophy to follow, but sometimes looking at the evidence or the data, you could realize things that you believed or you took it as a granted, but actually the reality is different from how you believed. That created shock in some countries historically, like Germany believed that they are good at providing the quality education and equitable education, but the first PISA revealed that their picture is different from how they saw their education systems. PISA is also about showing what is achievable in what kind of context. I am not telling that PISA can show what to do, but I am well specifying that it could show what is achievable and give elements to reflect on then what could be done to tackle the challenges. One important dimension, and I think that's the unique aspect of PISA, is also give attention to the equity issues. That gives light on the existing gaps, existing disadvantages in terms of students' context, learning context, and the outcome of their learning, and how disadvantages are related to that kind of outcome, and what education actors could do along with other stakeholders to mitigate the risks, to support disadvantaged students so that they can overcome the given disadvantages. All these are probably beautiful things, but I am also aware of the limitations and the cautions necessary. I'm not saying that PISA can tell everything, but PISA can be used to understand many questions that we would like to answer to improve the learning of children. Then, in response to the main question of this session, which is what to do with PISA, to kick off the discussions, I would offer you 3 responses to that questions. First is what to do with PISA. I would tell you, use it. But not just use it well, and use it right, and use it for the purpose. PISA is not for the purpose of creating sensational debate worldwide, but I remind you again that PISA was created and has been run for the purpose of improvement. So we can think about what we can get out of PISA to have some ideas on the remaining challenges, but also the elements for the reflections to identify the actions to be taken. But the general debate about PISA has been only in narrow areas and easy to understand findings. For example, you may know kind of where your country is situated in the mapping of the countries, not especially about the ranking. Everybody knows where your country is. But how many of you, for example, in your country, students, for example, 2015 PISA Scientific Literacy Assessment, your students were better in scientific knowledge compared to the scientific understanding in terms of the procedures or epistemic understanding of science, how science could be useful and meaningful to solve the problems. Do you know whether your country is better in knowledge or procedural or epistemic knowledge? Probably not many have seen that level of data. How many of you, whether your country has seen the improvement or not improvement in the enjoyment of learning of your students? That is another important dimension that we can learn from PISA. Sometimes not many people don't even know that PISA can also give some pictures on students' context of learning related to the performance. So there are many things that you can further explore. What you can hear through media or main reporting is really a tip of iceberg. The value of PISA is really well using the mass information that survey could generate, but also to make sense out of that much information to respond to specific questions, policy questions, practice questions that you might want to understand. And in that sense, many countries are making efforts to do secondary analysis, in-depth thematic analysis. Research community is very active in uncovering the PISA data and understanding different policy issues, which OECD general reporting is not covering. One example is, for example, OECD has a research fellowship called Thomas Alexander Fellowship, which support researchers to use the data from large-scale survey to better understand what we can learn from the survey, but also to give some scientific insights to improve the conduct of the survey. So if you are researchers or if you know researchers, please also let them know about these opportunities for the research supported by Open Society Foundation and run through the program of PISA. Second answer to the question what to do with PISA, for me, is to learn from the world using the lens of PISA. The value of PISA is not only understanding how your country or your jurisdiction is doing, but also what you can learn through the comparison between countries. Sometimes it's really exciting to see that we can understanding certain things because we compare with other countries. One example is, for example, 2015, we have analyzed the teaching time, learning time, and student performance. If you look within the country, if students have longer time for learning, they have higher chance of performing higher, which means that some policymakers are driving to change the education systems to add more and more time for teaching and learning. But if you compare the data across countries, the picture is different. Countries who are spending lots of time compared to others are not necessarily showing the higher possibility for students to achieve higher. But we could learn that many countries who are achieving high are actually spending much less time in general for teaching, which implies that after you look at the international picture, your assumption that adding learning time could generate better learning outcome is not the right conclusion, because it is not a matter of the amount, but actually if you compare across countries, you can realize that it's more about what kind of teaching, what quality of teaching matters more than the amount of time. So this is just one example. Then last point, third response to the question what to do with PISA, I would say make it relevant, make it more relevant. PISA, as I mentioned, is not answering to all the questions, but the PISA community, when I say PISA community, is not only the OECD, but all the participating countries and partners, including EI, are asking the questions, what are the relevant questions that we need to ask in response to the changing context of education systems. We have been assessing science, math, and reading literacies from the beginning, but at the same time, currently, we are also including the initiatives to respond to the emerging outcome areas that countries are considering important. And we are not just saying that these are important, impossible, or difficult to assess, so we don't do that. No, we invest certain amount of our energy to co-create, bringing all the expertise that we can find in the world to address that difficult but challenging exercise. That's why, for example, for 2015 PISA, we have developed and implemented the assessment of collaborative problem solving, because the PISA community discussed and agreed that more and more this kind of social dimensions of outcome is important as an outcome of education. 2018, we have been working on the assessment of global competence. As we have discussed, many countries believe that this is important and becoming more and more important, so why not trying to develop a measure to monitor and to appreciate where your students are and what teachers, parents, and other education stakeholders can do. So these are the 3 key points to kick off, but I'm also looking forward to the comments of Stefan and also the questions from participants.
Thank you very much, Yuri. Stefan.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Yuri, as well, for interesting introduction. Are you still with us?
Yeah, you can't see, can you?
I can't see anything from up here, so you're still there. Wave your hands. Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, in this short introduction, I plan to cover a few major questions about PISA, but first I would like to underline that I consider PISA to be a well-developed test instrument. I think that PISA, since the start in 2000, has produced many interesting findings, especially about correlations between test results and equity. I know well that the formal responsibility of PISA lies with the participating OECD countries represented in the board of participating countries, and not the OECD Secretariat. However, since this is an opportunity to debate PISA and its future, I'm going to focus on some more problematic aspects of PISA. And my main questions are the following. Are PISA results a good proxy for the quality of educational systems? Are PISA questions culturally unbiased? And are comparisons of students' standardized test results in a few dominants a necessary or fruitful prerequisite for improving work in schools? So first of all, I think no one in education will deny that student abilities in literacy, numeracy, and are fundamental for all types of learning, both inside and outside school. I also understand why 15-year-olds are tested, since they are the oldest students in obligatory schoolings in many countries. But even so, should 15-year-old students' PISA results in literacy, numeracy, and science at one point in time be interpreted as the proxy for the quality of the whole education system? The OECD itself seems to waver between different answers to this question. In the media statements at the time of publication of new results, the answer seems to be yes. But in the actual analysis reports, the answer is much more nuanced. I think the OECD should be well advised to stay nuanced. Although 15-year-olds have a lot in common across borders and cultures, there are also differences that might influence these results. This includes their attitudes towards schoolwork in general, and especially their attitude towards tests, where the results do not impact on personal grades. Mind you, the youth culture in general might also have an impact. As what age are young people given different kinds of responsibilities in school, in the family, and in society at large? So second, the high validity and reliability of the PISA tests is dependent on cultural unbiased test items. I am aware that many efforts have been made to fulfill this goal. However, and as far as I know, these pre-tests efforts to test for cultural bias only take into consideration differences between countries. I guess that's the reason why it is difficult to detect cultural bias of test items between groups of different backgrounds inside the individual countries. But when Australian and New Zealand students with a Chinese background, but who are born and gone to school in Australia and New Zealand, perform at the level of students in Shanghai and much better than the rest of the Australian and New Zealand students, it seems clear that a cultural bias is involved. A Norwegian statistician and a psychometrician, Jan Ube, has summed up PISA results by saying that East Asian students do much better on PISA than other countries, and that for all practical purposes, students from the rest of the industrialized world have more or less the same results. And he goes on to say that East Asian school systems should not be copied since they put too much competition pressure on young people, and this is probably why many Asian students report that they are unhappy in school. He also claims these are indications that they are not particularly good at developing the competencies that OECD has named 21st century skills, and which we now know are hard to measure, but can be evaluated by teachers. An important feature in PISA is the correlation between student results and a number of background variables reported subjectively by students and school leaders. Many of my colleagues would argue that these correlations are the most important outcomes of PISA. And yes, I agree. Many of them are interesting. But it becomes dangerous when some of these correlations, perhaps the one that supports mine or other preconceived ideas, are portrayed as causational relationships. The fact that background data is reported subjectively adds to this uncertainty. Thirdly, the belief that comparison of learning outcomes in a few domains is a necessary precondition for improvement work in education is now widespread, to a large extent, in my view, also because of PISA. My question is whether such comparison have been more a distractor than a help. I'm sure this has worked differently in different jurisdictions, but my clear impression is that there is little balance between government's effort to produce comparative data, big data, and their efforts to analyze, causal effects, and set up support systems for school and the teaching profession to help them improve. And there is a strong tendency to rely on so-called silver bullets in the improvement work. A lot of research indicates that student backgrounds and differences in teacher quality do not explain all differences in student outcomes, neither in the ones that are measured nor in the outcomes that are merely evaluated. Comparable big data produced by PISA and other international and national tests has tended to focus attention only on what's going on in the classroom. In many countries, this has underpinned politics and the culture of naming and shaming teachers. These developments have certainly not been helpful in giving students a better education. Instead, it has made it more difficult to recruit and retain teachers, and the number of unqualified people in teacher positions has risen in many countries. And the teacher perceived status in society has fallen, and so has the general trust in the teaching profession. These are big problems. Much less attention has been given to the quality of support functions in the education system. In my own country, the number of administrative and professional support staff has been reduced at the local level, while central bureaucracies have swelled. A lot more time and attention have been given to the control functions, less time to the professional support functions. In many cases, this development was supported by the production of high-stakes outcome data from standardized tests. And as we know, this is not the kind of data that is most helpful for teachers in their day-to-day work. One of the teacher union criticisms of PISA is its strong focus on just the two foundational competency, literacy and numeracy, in addition to, of course, physics, as you mentioned. This narrow focus has been strengthened by PISA's influence on national tests. It now seems as this criticism is being taken seriously by the OECD. However, instead of broadening the testing areas, we see with other school subjects, we see that we are working hard to prepare the foundations to be able to test, as you pointed out, emotional and social skills and other so-called 21st century skills. I'm sure we agree that the OECD describes on what the OECD describes as 21st century skills, and that they are important goals for education and education systems for a long time. To me, there is very little 21st century about them. They have been important parts of the Norwegian curriculum for at least 100 years. But it is true that we need to focus more on these goals because of the one-sided occupation with the kind of foundation cognitive skills measured by PISA and similar tests and surveys. But I would like to put up a large caution sign right here. Competence related to 21st century skills, social and emotional skills, should not be measured and scaled in the same way as cognitive skills are portrayed in PISA and other similar tests. Since these competences are so important, and because they can be taught and learned in school, but very often are also learned outside of education, they need to be assessed and evaluated, but not measured on standardized scales. There are many arguments, too many to mention in this short talk. Instead, therefore, I will leave you with a task of imagination. Try to imagine the following situation in, let's say, 2022. The 2021 PISA results have just been published. The participating countries are ranked according to their results on constructs representing 15-year-olds' conscientiousness, emotional stability, extroversion, and openness. My question to you is, would you believe that a psychological test question in these domains would tell the full truth about our students? And do you think this will help education to become more humane? To sum up, my answer to the 3 questions I've asked when I started talking is much closer to no than yes. PISA results are not a good proxy for the quality of a whole education system. However, PISA results can be used to improve education if their meaning and status is on a sensible scale. The PISA tests are probably not culturally unbiased. Education is just too embedded in history, culture, and political systems that such an allegation or a goal should have been made. Comparable tests results is not the best information for teachers about how they can improve their own teaching by adapting it to the needs of the individual students. And to end, I would like to once again point to the warning sign. Social and emotional skills should not be measured through standardized testing. It would challenge our profession's integrity. Thank you.
I think both speakers really covered the topic and the question in depth, and I'm very, very grateful to them both, actually, and the applause is well deserved. Now, like Stefan and Yuri, I'm peering through a fog here, and I'm going to try and get up and see if there are any... Look, I tell you what, I'm just going to do a very... If you, both of you, can answer these 2 questions, I'll kick off, in 1 minute each, and then we can get going. Okay, now, Yuri, to start off with, let's say a country comes to you and says, bearing in mind the PISA evidence, we want you to help us redesign our education system. What's your response to that?
Well, it's an, question for which we need to do a really serious work. As you mentioned, to understand the full picture of quality of education, we need to look into different dimensions. And I believe PISA could give many elements, not telling all, but many elements to understand first where challenges lie. You have to understand what your students, how your students are doing, but also what are the factors related to their challenges. But at the same time, the value of international comparison, as I mentioned earlier, and that's the point where probably I have different views with Stefan, is that you can further explore what could be possible out of the experiences that you have seen within your own circumstances or out of the imagination. You never think of that way of linking certain educational outcome issues and underpinning factual issues in your context. So, I think that requires, if you want to identify the actions to be taken to improve, that requires lots of analysis to understand, but also it could be stronger if you bring other data, other analysis to make sense out of the data of PISA. So I am in a position to value both PISA-type quantitative data, but also some other kind of research or understanding of the issues to explain what we can see out of PISA. So, that's why, for example, countries sometimes come to the OECD and propose to work together to better understand what their PISA results mean and what they could think about the future steps. And that kind of work takes a year, 2 years. We have done recently that kind of work with Wales, Sweden, and it was, in addition to analyzing the data from PISA, we spent time with educational stakeholders in the country to also understand their reality, their interpretation of the challenges, and also to understand the context where these data are applied to. So I would say that that kind of, elements that we need to think. And the conclusion is that I cannot give an answer to that question immediately after the question is asked.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And I just want to ask Stefan, actually, the Alberta Teachers Association sponsored book, I will take you, concludes that PISA is one of the best ever efforts to accurately measure educational outcomes. And it says that actually PISA should be put into service to argue for changes that can make education systems fairer and better. And some of the conclusions are that public education systems are better than private ones when social background is taken into account, it's anti-selection, and that the teaching profession is at the center of all successful education systems. Does that sway you in terms of your views about PISA?
Well, it's almost like a trick question, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's
Because,
exactly a trick question.
Because, you know, it's possible to, like I said in my introduction, it's possible to find something in PISA that would support my view, and you've pointed to some of them right there, and then say, well, this is what we found. This supports the PISA system because it supports what I feel, but it's not. That's not the case here. The case I'm making is that the system in itself has problematic sides to it. It's not the findings in itself. I support research in education. We need a lot more of it in Norway, but I don't think it's more PISA research that we need. We need action-based research. We need research that has a contextual, a cultural element to it. We need to answer questions that Norwegian teachers have to the Norwegian setting.
Right, thank you. Thanks very much, Stefan. And there was a colleague there. Now, what could people, when they ask questions, kind of do it in a haiku form, i.e. about 5 words rather than 500, as we can get as many people as possible. Could you say who you are when you ask your question, please? There's a colleague there.
I don't have my translation equipment.
John Murray
All right.
Mulheron from the Australian Education Union.
Right, here we are. I'm just, sorry, if you just hold it a minute, I'm just giving Stefan his, and I'm putting mine on as well. Okay, fine. Sorry, that's me. That means that's part of me not being able to see David,
Okay.
actually. But anyway,
Thanks.
go on.
Murray Mulheron from the Australian Education Union.
Sorry, so there are two people speaking.
Well, there's 2 people standing up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to raise this issue with the panel, and it goes to the credibility of the OECD PISA examination because of its relationship with a company that's known to most of us as Pearson. Because as you know, Pearson has a small part of the contract for PISA 2018, and I'm interested in the OECD's tendering or procurement policy and how it manages the risk assessment of a conflict of interest in a commercial company like Pearson that has been pushing tens of millions of standardised tests throughout the USA, an anti-teacher agenda, been endorsing schools in the global south with unqualified teachers who crave respectability in the education community, that have been responsible for some of the worst anti-educational practices of any edu-businesses, deeply connected to the education technical companies, technology companies that have been pushing software, replacing teachers, and the list goes on. I'm interested in the OECD tendering procurement policy that manages conflict of interest so that we get to a point now where this same company is responsible and has an association with PISA 2018 and the damage that potentially has for the OECD PISA brand.
Thank you. Right, there's a colleague there. I think, no, okay. I'm sorry that she's not got her hand up at the moment. If you look at, oh no, never mind. I'll come back. Sorry, I was pointing to you. Yes, sorry, I can hardly see you, but there's a colleague there. Yeah. Yes, do pass the phone. Pass the microphone over.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Luis Kruger de FECODE, Colombia.
Oh,
Para nosotros,
okay.
la propuesta de nuestro gobierno de ingresar a la OSD se nos convirtió en un problema de política interna en materia educativa, porque se toman las pruebas PISA como un referente para generar un marchitamiento de la imagen de la educación pública y promover la educación contratada o privatizada como el referente a imitar, y con eso se marchite la imagen de los alumnos y de los maestros de la escuela pública. Y PISA termina siendo el referente para marchitar la imagen. No estamos en contra de la investigación en educación, pero creemos nosotros que las pruebas deben dar cuenta del contexto y que no sea una oportunidad para montar un negocio más de un derecho fundamental como es el de la educación.
Can I thank you for that question, because you kept it to exactly the right length of time. Thank you. Right, okay.
Gracias, John. En primer lugar, me gustaría felicitar a la organización por tratar en un panel el tema PISA, porque me consta que todos los sindicatos que estamos aquí lo debatimos en cada uno de nuestros países. Cuando salen los resultados del informe y los medios de comunicación nos llaman al sindicato para conocer nuestra opinión, todos estamos pendientes para ver cómo nuestro país queda en el ranking mundial. Y a mí me gustaría decir dos palabras. Una, precaución. Hay que tener mucha precaución porque los resultados PISA son muy cuestionables. Me ha encantado la intervención de Stefan, porque yo, en España, en Comisión Europea, nosotros la suscribimos al 100% y somos críticos. Y muestro todo mi respeto a la representante de la OCDE. Pero los resultados PISA no evalúan los sistemas educativos. Los resultados PISA etiquetan a los alumnos, porque los chicos que viven en contextos con un nivel económico alto sacan mejores notas, juegan con ventaja. La evaluación de esos niños tienen ventaja y etiquetan a centros de primera y de segunda clase. Los centros donde los niños sacan resultados escolares buenísimos son centros de primera calidad. Claro, están en zonas económicamente altas. Los niños que sacan peores resultados están en zonas desfavorecidas. Por lo tanto, no a la etiqueta, porque al final hay gobiernos que quieren evaluar a los docentes en función de esos centros. Y muchas gracias. Perdonad si me he extendido.
Thank you. Now, there are two people over here and then I'll come back. Right, there's a colleague there.
Gitta Franke-Zöllmer, WBE Germany. So I would like to know what kind of correlation you see after 1.5 days talking about our understanding in EI about quality of education and the results of PISA testing. I can't see any, but maybe I'm wrong. So that is the one. And the other thing is can you imagine that there are countries who don't want to have educational systems like countries with the best PISA results for that? And on the other hand, one of the points of PISA testing is to make sure that the young people have a chance in the labor market. So when I look at Germany, I know that the PISA results are not the best. They are in the middle of that, but we have the lowest youth unemployment. We have our labor market and our economy is flourishing, and all that done by people who have been through our educational system. So why do we need these competition, these testing from PISA?
Thank you. And I'm going to take one more and then I'm going to ask Yuri and Stefan to come back. Colleague there. I think I can see it's you, Phil. Yeah. And you've got an offer to make as well, haven't you?
I do. Well, I have two. I have two books, and I have to determine how we give them out. One being if you have a birthday, and then I think the other one is if you have had a grandchild or birth in the last, whoever has had both of those. So we'll do that at the end. But I do have first of all, I want to thank both of you, and also, just compliment Stefan for, I think, what was a really articulate demonstration of our concerns. Alberta teachers in Alberta, Canada, almost unanimously passed a resolution last year to urge our Minister of Education to withdraw from PISA and other international benchmarking. The reason that Alberta teachers did that, even though we're at the top of the league tables, is that we do 5 international benchmark tests: PISA, TALIS, ISOLS, PEARLS, TIMS. We spend close to $1 million on these tests, and the teachers in Alberta see little value in terms of the actual change. So that's kind of the background. My question, though, Yuri, actually is one a little bit more back to what this event is about, around autonomy and professional autonomy. Right now, we have 2 specific concerns with the international benchmarking and the TALIS in particular that we're in the middle of doing as a field test. The concerns are teachers should be voluntarily participating in this and have a kind of an informed participation. We're seeing this coming from a government to a school district push down where teachers are feeling they have to do, or they have to participate. So there's a kind of a sense of, are they there? The other question that's the real one around ethics is, you've been gathering in TALIS 2013 item data and participant behavior data. That data that's gathered, our teachers were not aware of that data being gathered, how they take the test, how they respond to the questions. Will you be able to give informed consent in the next iterations of PISA and TALIS around the test-taking data, the behavior of how they take the test?
Okay, thanks very much. Look, is it possible for you two to come back on those 2 in just a couple of minutes each? We're running out. Well, we've got a bit of time, but not that much. Yuri, do you want to come back first?
Yep, good. So I try my best to respond to all these questions. This is kind of a test for me to exercise my compassion and respect and openness to all these, different views and ideas, but also explain clearly my perspectives. Well, sorry if I don't point out each of the questions, but I would be around today and tomorrow, so don't hesitate to talk to me for individual conversations, but I will pick up some of the main questions that have been asked. First, questions around actually what would be the implication for teachers, the country's participation in PISA. That is an important challenge that OECD is also aware of, because PISA by design is an evaluation of system performance. Although we ask students and teachers and sometimes parents to take part in, but it's not designed to give an immediate feedback to teachers what teachers filling the questionnaires to understand about their practices, their conditions related to their students. It's not the purpose of PISA. But at the same time, we think it's important that PISA becomes more relevant for teachers, more useful for teachers, not only talking about system-level pictures, but what teachers can get out of that. That's why we are making efforts to translate what we can learn from PISA for teachers, like what we did for PISA 2012 data, to create some kind of more specific questions that we can extract from the PISA analysis, so that teachers can reflect on the international findings of PISA. But at the same time, we also need teachers' involvement to interpret, make sense, and also give, better understanding of what PISA results mean. For example, 2015, we got some puzzling results out of the teaching strategies data. Many teachers, and I myself, believe that, for example, using the science experimentation could be for the benefit of better learning outcome of students, but PISA doesn't show that. It's not necessarily related to the high use of experimentations and outcome of science. Then we need to ask questions ourselves. Why? What explains that? And what are the underlying factors and conditions and context that we need to understand? So we would like to further have a conversation on that, but at the same time, I take your point of the professional autonomy and the sense of giving decision to teachers whether they take part in the survey or not. Well, this is a dilemma because PISA and TALIS that you mentioned are sample-based survey, so that we don't need to ask everybody to participate in the questions, but we decide from technical point of view the optimal size of people to participate in, so that we can have reliable enough data to understand the whole picture. And of course, for countries' participation to be meaningful, we need to have a certain level of participation rate. That's why countries are encouraging teachers and students to participate in, but I know that some countries have difficulties to have the participation of teachers and students. So that is one thing that we would like to further look into. Just probably last question related to what you have asked, but also what Stefan has raised. Actually, what should be assessed and what should be important areas? My view is that if socio-emotional skills or socio-emotional dimensions of learning is important, we need to know how the students are doing. Then, if we need to know, we need to come up with an idea what could be the best way to get that understanding and the picture. And PISA, as a platform to do the international comparison, we are keen to develop that areas, but taking into account the concerns that you have mentioned. For example, global competence, we include the side of the attitudes, or how students have values with regard to the global dimensions. But we are not doing the test on that. We are combining the test of understanding of students' global knowledge or the skills, but combined with the questionnaires to understand the contextual information of students, to what extent they are showing openness. Yeah, to what extent they are also keen to get involved in the dialogue with different students of different background. So that's some parts of the
Okay,
answers.
thanks very much, Shirley. I briefly, Stefan, as well, since a lot of the questions were focused at the OECD.
So I want to make two comments. We, the educators, I think I agree with Phil. We, the educators, don't see PISA as a necessary tool to develop our practices in the classroom from day to day. And I think a lot of teachers would sign up for that. They don't need it. So when you say we need this information, who are we? Because I don't think it is the teacher in the classroom. That's the first point. The other point is, this is a system created to make educational systems better, to learn from each other, to gather data from different countries so that we could see what's going on there. Let's learn from them. But if you look at PISA results on the big scale, there hasn't been, on the three areas, there hasn't been a rise in results. On the contrary, the results are getting a bit worse. So it's not helpful for the teachers in the classroom. The results show on a systematic level, it's not improving results. I think those are two really important comments to make. So what should we do? You know, you have the proof to, you have the burden of proof, is that what you call it? To show us, how can PISA really be useful for teachers? You don't seem to have the answer. The teachers need information, we need support, we need research. And instead we get misinterpretation. We get policies that don't fit with the results of PISA. We get political discussions about shaming teachers. The same result in maths in Norway from one year on another year. They were exactly the same. One year it was a crisis. The other year it was we're doing better. It's ridiculous.
Right, thank you, Stefan. Look, I'm very concerned. There are two colleagues who have been desperate to come in. Look, I'm just going to try and squeeze in just a couple more. There's one there and there's one at the back, but can you just make it very short points? Okay, first. Yes, I can see you.
Fátima da Silva, do Brasil e da Internacional de Educação da América Latina. Com a mesma paixão e convicção que se defende PISA, eu quero dizer que defendo em contrário a PISA. Para que serve PISA? Para avaliar iguales los desiguales. É dizer que niño de la Amazonía indígena tem que ser comparado e ser igual e ter o mesmo rendimento que de Finlândia, porque esta é a moda, que Finlândia é o modelo que PISA nos mostra. Segundo, ¿para qué serve PISA? Para aumentar la industria de dinero del público para el privado, porque quien aplica las pruebas es un grande negocio, porque cuesta mucho y muchísimo para los gobiernos mantener el sistema de avaliación de PISA y somado a eso ainda, todos los países tienen un sistema de avaliación propio. Entonces sirve para esto y sirve también para nos ranquear de los peores, de los pobres y de los ricos. Sirve para hacer un drama a los maestros y los profesores cuando reciben los resultados y los gobiernos llegan y dicen, la culpa es de ustedes que los niños, los estudiantes no fueron bien. Y no leva en cuenta en esta avaliación el contexto histórico, socioeconómico y las condiciones, tanto de los educadores cuanto de los educandos. Entonces, para esto que sirve PISA. Y por último, para ser breve, tenemos que tener claridad. Si estamos en una campaña en contra Pearson, porque es la transnacional de la educación que está tomando conta del sector privado, ¿cómo estamos asociados a un foro que Pearson aplica las pruebas y que va a tener dinero público para el privado?
I just want to get one more person in. Thank you. Right, there's one person at the back.
Okay, thanks very much, John. I'm from Larry Flanagan from Scotland. We are a small country. We have difficulty producing culturally non-biased materials between Glasgow and Edinburgh, and they're 40 miles apart. So there's a real challenge globally in doing this. I think there is useful data in PISA that you can use. The difficulty is it rarely gets analysed in any depth because politicians seize on league tables as drivers for their political differences. Now, this year, we had a dip in our performance this year in Scotland. I could tell you why it happened. Understanding why it happened is important. Those same pupils, 18 months later, produced the second best results of qualifications in the history of Scotland. So the dip wasn't a problem. The problem was the country to the south of Scotland had a little rise, England. And that is a problem because they actually did better. And now the politicians in England are claiming that their reforms, high-stakes testing, core curriculum, knowledge-based, is somehow better than the broader education policies that we're seeking in Scotland. So I think the challenge is how we actually challenge misinterpretation of assessment data by politicians who don't actually understand what it means in real terms in terms of educational progress. And that's a challenge for EI, I think. PISA is a bunch of data. The danger comes from political interpretation around that. And I think we have to make sure we're responding to that. And I'm sure Stefan would see that as part of our agenda, making sure that data is not being misinterpreted and driving the wrong objectives in our education system.
1 minute each, Stefan and then Yuri.
I don't actually need a minute. I just want to end with one sentence from EI's policy paper document, and it states that quality education is determined in terms of culture and context. That's it. That's my final remark.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And Yuri.
Yes, The question on the procurement and the Pearson's involvement, that was an issue of EI, and we had a clarification conversation, so I don't get into detail, but we provided EI all the clarity in terms of the selection of experts and contractors involved in PISA. But my last word, as one of the participants say, the passion to talk about PISA, what I would highlight as a last word is that there are many disadvantaged students who stayed invisible if there were not be PISA. Those disadvantaged students who are having less chance to get upper education levels, or students, for example, in Denmark we discussed, with migration background have lower chance of, or lower possibility of achieving high and having stronger sense of belongings. They discovered that when we analyzed PISA, then now we shed light on the issues of migration and immigrant students in Denmark, for example. So use PISA in that way to not to forget the students lagging behind or out of the radar of the policy discussions.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just want to thank both our speakers. No one fell asleep. No one fell asleep. Can we give them a really good... And what is crystal clear to me is this debate could have gone on for another 2 hours. So thank you very much for your active participation, David.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, John. You got to catch a flight, right? So, Phil's books. Birthday, or just dying to have a copy? Quickly. You can't. That doesn't work, Winsome. You can't do it that way. This is the book that Phil took. All right, back there. I've got 2 back there. Maybe. Come on up, and both of you can come up and get them. We'll go right here. Thank you. As we were just finishing, Andy Hargreaves, who's right here, corrected me because I was reading his bio when I introduced him yesterday, that he was the 6th most influential education researcher on U.S. policy. That was based on some sort of index that calculation made by Amazon in terms, right? By Education Week. Okay. And we just found out that he's fallen from 6th most influential to 30th. But I think EI will take issue with that, and we will be sending a letter to Education Week because there's no way that he can slip in the rankings that much. All right. All right, so we're awake. We're going to pivot now. What are we going to do? One of the main things we want to work on here, and one of the things you've been doing in the workshops, is how we lead our professions. How we do not leave it to the markets to decide what a teacher is, what they should know, what they should be able to do. We know best, right? Am I right? So, one of the ways in which EI is thinking about this, and we need your help in this session, so if you're at a table by yourself, it's really good to get in a table with some other people, is we're going to workshop something because we thought, what if EI established global guidelines, not global standards, because as Stefan just pointed out, we're not going to tell Norwegian teachers what they need to be known and be able to do. But as a global profession, as a global teacher union movement, we do have experience and knowledge in what are those conditions by which professional standards can be created. Correct? I mean, we've had experiences from Australia, those of you who were in there, from Scotland. We've heard lots of different ways because we know if we don't do this, and we heard from Dennis and from Andy and others, if we don't take control, others are going to fill that space, and they already are around the world. It's one of the things that keeps me up at night when I see in country after country private companies saying, we have an online test you can take, and by virtue of doing that, you get to become a teacher, right? We don't endorse that. And so we're taking advantage of the fact that OECD's here and UNESCO's here and others because we have a vision. We want to learn from all of you and your experiences at the national level in terms of leading and setting standards so that the Teach for Alls, the Teach for Americas, the Teach Firsts, who train people in a matter of weeks and say, put them in front of the poorest, most marginalized children. Are we okay with that? Is that quality? No. Right? That's charity. This is about those people. It's not about our kids, right? They put it on their curriculum. So we need to be proactive, and we need to think really hard about the principles, about the values, about our professional integrity, about the things we know to be true. And so what we want to do is have you work, you're feeding into this. We are going to be developing over the next few months global guidelines on professional teaching standards. So we can say to Teach First, sorry, you don't meet the standard. And we're going to take those with the Teacher Task Force. We're going to take those at the ISTP. We're going to take those all over the world. We're even going to take them to the United Nations for endorsement so that the world's teachers and education support professionals have established guidelines by which we evaluate what governments are doing. We evaluate whether or not we have a space at the table. You evaluate that, and we're starting that right now. Right? Are you up for this? Yeah? Great. So, I have two friends of mine, colleagues at EI, who are going to take you through this really important first session on how we pull this together. Okay? So I'm going to turn it over to Martin and Jelmer, and they will tell you what we're going to do next, and I'll just be joining you. So thanks very much. Martin, Jelmer?
Yeah, Martin's going to start it off.
Okay. Well, you know that in EI, if there is a process underway and you're able to come to a conference and you're able to hear a story, that you can take it back to your own country and you can start a process there. And I just want to begin with a story about a friend of mine, Christopher Yakulanda, who comes from the Zambian National Union of Teachers. And ZNUT came to an EI conference, and they heard at that conference that teachers' councils were absolutely critical to the way that education is working in a whole number of countries. And they went back to Zambia, and they said to their government, well, in our country, we don't have a teachers' council, and we don't have any involvement in discussing what professionalism is and how professionalism works in our country. This can't be right. So they went to the government. The government responded by saying, well, that's a good point. So they set up a teachers' council, and in that teachers' council, they put the union at the center of the process, and the chair of that council is Christopher Yakulanda, who is a member of ZNUT. Now, that process of involving the teachers' union in the setting up of a teachers' regulatory governance body in the relationship with professional standards is the critical way to go. As David said, being somebody who is able to be part of a professional conversation and a part of a standard-setting process is something that we all share. And we're stronger in this if we support each other and we're able to give a set of guidelines to our governments that say, not these are the standards, but this is the process that we must follow. And I'll take you back to an academic who in 1958, Lieberman, said that professionalism and the professional's ability to have autonomy and the ability to govern themselves was central to what it is to be a professional. We are a professional union organization, and we need teachers to be at the center of this process. And Jelmer's going to take us through the setup for what we're going to do to discuss the parts of the standards that we're going to be looking at today.
Thank you.
Jelmer.
Timo, can I have the... Yeah, thank you. So we already had an introduction by David and by Martin. So we conducted a survey amongst our affiliates, in which we asked several questions just to see what is out there. It's really hard to make the survey because it was it's so different how they are constructed. The language you could tell already from yesterday when we were talking about standards from Latin America that it means something completely different. At the dinner yesterday, I was talking in Denmark. They're perceived as different from the Netherlands. So we tried to have a whole range of questions, and we got quite a good feedback, I think, from our affiliate. Quite a few jurisdictions do have standards, which is already quite interesting. This one is also quite interesting. When were the standards when were they made and developed and implemented? And you can see a spike from the 2000s, and I think that goes a bit with Andy's and Dennis's story about the global fourth way, where we have sort of like also neoliberal policies and also more standardization and like new public management, I think, and that's the way the standards have been used quite a bit in those eras. And I think it's still continuing, and especially if you look at the global south right now, you can see like there's a big activity going on right now, regional teaching councils being set up, national teaching councils being set up. So it's happening at this moment. Right now in the Netherlands, we're in a really big debate, emotional debate, about the standards where we're in. And it also has to do, I think, with this. Is there a real teacher and collective autonomy for the professional standards? If you're a profession, I think you have to set them yourselves. You have to be involved in them. And then when you start digging into the governance process and the teaching councils, or who is in charge of these different things, then you can see that sort of like teachers don't have a lot of say in quite a few countries or jurisdictions. And that's very, very problematic. And when we're talking about teacher autonomy, it's not just in the classroom or in the school, it's also a systemic issue. And I think that's where the standards come in, and I think David really mentioned it really well. So what I'd like you to do for the next half hour, I'm trying to keep it short. I took out lots of questions during the debate because we were already running late, and I want to try to keep it to 6 o'clock. So I took out some questions, but we're going to do a little bit group work. And usually I do this with 30 students. My students already left. I had a couple of them here during the last 2 days, and they had to leave, and they would be quite familiar with this one. There are questions on your table, 10 of them. They're in 3 languages, but I'd advise you to find someone of your own sort of language group. They're here in English, French, and in Spanish. Try to find people around a group of 3, 4, or 5 people, more than 2, because then you can have a proper discussion. Introduce yourself really, really shortly, like a haiku, but then even shorter. What's just been said? Choose someone who sort of like facilitates shortly the discussion, and then also someone who's writing it down. You can use one of the papers, one of the questions, and turn it over and write the answers on the back. We are going to use what you write down. We are going to use it. This is sort of like part of our process to collect more information, and we're going to put it into the next report that we're going to write. So if you can do that now. Start sitting down and settling down. Choose a group leader and someone who's going to write down, or note down the answers. So please pay attention also when I'm speaking up. It's quite hard to manage a group of 30 students, as you know. It's harder to manage a group of 200 students. I'm going to ask you 2 poll questions, so you can also have your device ready. So 2 questions are going to be in the poll. And we're going to go through the questions one by one. I've picked out a few, so they're not in the order that are there. So please pay attention to what I'm saying, and we have about 5 minutes each for each question. As you can see, if you can have your attention, as you can see, I switched one around, and it was also had to do with a conversation I had with my students this afternoon. They were asking loads and loads of questions on what exactly privatization meant, what a professional is, those kind of things. So we had to define lots of things because they're doing research on education. So I took the third question as the sort of like the starting off question. So what's your definition of professional teaching standards? And if you can take 5 minutes, and please note down the answers that you have. And I'm going to probably take some time to do 1 or 2 plenary answers with the roving mics. So if you can take 5 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes to answer this, please. What's your definition of professional teaching standards? If I can get the group leaders to try to sort of slowly that everybody stays quiet. We're going to continue to the next one. I'm going to do the next one, sort of ask them plenary. You can probably lead into the next question. Does the teaching profession need professional standards? You heard what David said, but as I found out, there's lots of discussion amongst teachers, amongst union leaders, amongst each other, amongst us. So we still want to hear about this. Do we need those standards? So again, if you can take about 4 questions, and then I'm going to ask 2 people with the roving mic afterwards, and when we answer this question. Question 1: does the teaching profession need professional standards?
Want to say something.
Okay, can I, I'd like to go around and ask one or two people if they can respond to this question. So does the teaching profession need professional standards? There in the back with, I think, Tom.
Hi, Jolan. Is it the first question that we're... or both? I can do both.
If you can do them both.
All right. With regard to the first, our answer has a couple of dimensions. One is that agreed standards, standards are agreed statements developed by the profession expressing the dimensions of practice that constitute quality in teaching. We say the statements must reflect daily practice. These statements of standards must reflect daily practice and be recognised as that amongst teachers to have validity. The statements must allow the engagement of individuals in professional discussion as to what constitutes quality, in other words, an expression of professional judgment. They must allow for moderation in different places in the profession. The dimensions will typically include knowledge, competence, and ethics. That's our question one. Do you want question two?
Yeah, let's do it. And then we'll do one more, and then we'll continue.
Our simple answer to question two was yes, but then we went further. Standards are necessary to allow for decisions as to who should enter the profession. If you don't have standards, there's no basis for the decision. Standards support status, and standards allow for the expression of an ethical stance to protect the quality of the profession in the interests of the profession, but also in the interests of children and the community.
Thanks.
So yes.
Yeah, there's one more here.
¿En español? Sí, en la mesa nuestra nos parece que la palabra estándar, el concepto estándar, es incorrecto para referirse al quehacer docente. Y porque tiene una asociación, el lenguaje crea realidad, el lenguaje tiene una connotación cultural, y la palabra estándar está asociada a procesos productivos, a procesos de la industria, de la empresa, y no es pertinente ni es adecuado para el quehacer pedagógico docente. En principio, en una primera mirada muy rápida, por lo tanto que le falta desarrollo, creemos que hay 4 categorías que podrían dar cuenta mejor del quehacer docente: conocimientos, 1, habilidades, 2, aptitudes, 3, y actitudes, 4. Esas 4 categorías podrían dar mejor cuenta de lo que debe ser las características de un buen docente. Eso.
Can I just ask a small follow-up question? So what would be a word that could be used in this case to describe this? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Could you then please, so what kind of word, very shortly, could be used in the Spanish language to describe this overall?
Lo que pasa es que si el quehacer docente es complejo, no sé si es una sola palabra, no sabemos si es una sola palabra la que puede dar cuenta de esa complejidad, por eso hablamos de 4 categorías. Conocimientos es una categoría, habilidades es otra, aptitudes, la tercera, y la cuarta es actitudes. Si logramos, si nos dan tiempo, a lo mejor llegamos a una palabra, pero por ahora llegamos a esas 4.
Can I say something? I'll say it in English. But I think lo que nosotros, I'll say it in Spanish better. We can have those 4 expressions that were just mentioned under something that we might call a dimension, for example. Mm-hmm. We don't have to call it a standard. In other words, the concept of having an umbrella that divides the different aspects of teaching can be under a word like a dimension or category or whatever, but not the word standard. That's the word that is At least in Spanish, sounds bad.
Well, that's exactly sort of like the information we need, the discussion that we need to have. So this is really good, sort of like really good feedback, I think. And you're probably not the only like region where you have probably this opinion. Can I ask you to go to get your phone out? Also, there are a couple of 3 poll questions in the app, and I want to do this one. Question 5. This is also quite contested. So, what kind of sectors? And I'm going to stick with professional standards for now. Should be included, so early childhood, primary education, secondary, tertiary, higher education, school leadership, and with administration, I mean more sort of like on a sort of like district level, if there also should be standards. So if there are standards for teachers, why shouldn't there be one for administrators? So that's sort of like the question we could ask. And hopefully, if the poll was constructed correctly, you can have different. You can have more, I think. You have the option to include them all. That's sort of more the district level, so like maybe administrating multiple schools in one area. Okay, it's an interesting sort of like debate to have and look at. So why would you include one sector and not another one? That's something that we really need to figure out, I think. And I know that there's a big debate going on in higher education if they should have professional standards or not. So that's something we should delve into. I'm going to continue to the next question. And I know there are some other people who would like to come in. I'd like to do a question first, and then Phil can come in after that question. Yeah, thank you. So the survey shows that in many cases, teachers are not represented in the structures that govern professional teaching standards, and that's something, usually there is some kind of body. Could be the government itself, could be a teaching council that has been appointed to govern the standards. But in many cases, and the survey really shows that teachers don't have a say in that. So how can we ensure that teacher leadership in the governance of professional teaching standards, so how can we ensure that that's sort of like it is there, that teachers have a say in the whole process? Maybe you can speak for your own experience, or maybe you have something from your own experience that is sort of like a case that we don't want to go to, like an example. So maybe both. So we can continue the conversation in a minute. I'd like to ask someone to come in. He already wanted to come in earlier. It's on this topic as well. I walked around and I already heard some really interesting examples of how teachers could be involved and who are already involved, also on this table there. Phil, I think you wanted to come in.
I can tell you an example that I'm personally involved with. We've had in Alberta for over 20 years, we've had a teaching quality standard where you are certificated as a teacher in Alberta based on that standard. If there's discipline related issues, that standard is used. I can say that we've found it to be really useful in raising the trust in the profession and what happens, and that's been powerful. One of the interesting things, though, is that it is a constantly unfolding issue. So 20 years later, I'm on the writing team to revise the standards, and 3 of my colleagues, we have been instrumental as the profession rewriting it, and that's been powerful. However, the implementation of the standards, if the government were to change legislation or take that away after the fact, or, you know, it's not just creating the standard, it's the whole ecosystem of implementing the standard, revising the standard once it's done, and we cannot be as teachers on the far side of that kind of change and reform. We have to be central to it. And even across in Canada, my colleagues here, we were talking about how in some provinces this has gone wrong. It's not the standard creation that's the problem, it's the adjudication and the implementation after. So it's important to have a standard, but it's also important to be there all through the life of where that standard lives and over time.
Yeah, I think at your tables, yeah.
Well, just to follow up from what Phil was saying, I'm from the province of Saskatchewan in Canada, where we did for many, many years, we were a self-regulating professional federation of teachers. We had discipline or professional codes of competency, of ethics. We had also discipline processes attached to those, discipline committees that were made up of teachers who were elected by, within our federation, members, our own members. And this process worked, we thought, very well. In hindsight, I think it probably would have been helpful if we had done more communicating about those processes. There was a complaints process with it so that people could, if they had a concern about a teacher, could make a complaint. The litmus test for us is a complaint frivolous, vexatious, or an abuse of the process? If that was the type of complaint, then it was not pursued. But where there were valid complaints and they were judged to be that, they went on to the discipline processes. About 4 years ago, our provincial government, coming from a very definite ideological perspective, decided that it wanted to set up a college of teachers which would remove that self-regulating authority from the Teacher Federation. And the Teacher Federation, the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation, was able to negotiate with the government and pull them more towards a joint kind of an administration of this type of process, and we had input into the setting of the standards and the process and all of that. The challenge has come with the implementation, which is relatively recent. To give you an example, there was a recent case where that made the papers, where a teacher threw a marker across the room to get the attention of a student, and the marker hit another student. So the parent of the second student made a complaint to this new board that's been set up. This case was adjudicated right to the discipline committee, and the teacher was found guilty of misconduct and fined $10,000 for throwing a marker. That the Teacher Federation pursued it after the fine was reduced to 1,000, which in my view is still very punitive. But the point is, implementation is very important, but even when you've had that ability to be involved in the governance of professional teaching standards, you're part of that process. You have to be transparent, and you really need to be very vigilant about sustaining that, caring for it, communicating well about those processes with government and with the public and other education partners in order to maintain it.
Yeah, so it comes also back through the survey and the comments that we got from the survey that it's constantly, well, maybe sometimes under threat and sometimes going well. So it's something you need to work on continuously. So and sometimes going right. And sort of like the political party that is in power really sort of like defines how this is going. So it's sort of like a continuous process. And let's do one more question, I think, and then we'll continue to the last one.
Oui, je m'appelle Gilbert Sekhen et je viens du Liban. À propos de cette question, on a vu qu'il y a plusieurs points qu'on peut parler de plusieurs points concernant cette chose-là. Tout d'abord, premièrement, on peut parler de l'intervention des syndicats avec le gouvernement pour intégrer les professeurs dans la plupart des décisions majeures. Deuxièmement, on peut parler aussi d'une formation initiale. Troisièmement, formation continue. Et quatrièmement, relier les nouvelles méthodologies d'enseignement avec la technologie et la mettre à la disposition des enseignants. Quatrièmement, le soutien des enseignants. Cinquièmement, faciliter les échanges des informations entre les différents secteurs professoraux. Et enfin, respecter les enseignants qualifiés et les honorer. Merci.
Okay, thank you. I think we're running past, so I've got sort of 10 past 6 planned on where we're gonna, how we're gonna end it up. So the final question is, and that's really important, also came through in the survey quite often, that there's a tension between what the role of unions could play, if there are multiple unions involved, if there's one union involved, it's sort of like from Saskatchewan, the example, then you can play a big role, also sort of like as a professional association. So what kind of role do the teachers' unions play in the governance and the implementation of professional teaching standards? And please refer again to your own sort of like what your own union has been doing. I think we're going to take about 4 minutes to do that, one more final plenary round, and we're going to finish off with a poll. So 4 more minutes. If I can have two more people, I already saw a hand coming up, two more people responding, and I think here...
I'm on. Am
on
I
the
on?
right.
Can
We have
oh, you can hear me, good.
Response, Tom again?
Yep. Yeah, look, we were eager to answer both this question and the previous, and say this, that in our circumstance, in the state of New South Wales in Australia, teachers are elected to the governing board, the teacher unions are appointed, but what is crucial for us is, teachers participate in all the decisions that apply the standards. That is professional development providers, university courses, accreditation of teachers, registration of teachers. Teachers make those judgments. But what is crucial for us is that a superstructure, a policy that goes beyond our jurisdiction's borders is established to protect what we have won, because it is vulnerable to political change. And the reason I'm here really is to argue for this point, so I have to take this opportunity. We are vulnerable to political cycles, we are vulnerable to change, and we need the protection of an organisation like EI establishing structures, principles and processes that are seen to be natural and correct beyond national borders to establish an ethical and professional dimension.
Thanks. I think it's a really good, really good comment. Stefan?
I just want to point out the importance of context here. The worst thing that could happen is that EI decides professional standards for the teaching profession as a whole on a global scale, which are does not have a legitimacy among the teachers in a country, and then the governments of that same country imposes those standards on the teaching profession. So what are professional standards worth if they don't have the legitimacy of the teachers who are then committed to them? You see?
Mm-hmm.
This is dangerous. So I think there's a reason to maybe nuance the previous speaker's point that EI could do this, but it's a very, very dangerous path to go down. If not all member organizations can say, thumbs up, we agree. We are on difficult grounds.
I completely agree, I think, and it's also, it's always contextualized, and of course there are guidelines to implementing them. It's not going to be global standards themselves. And it always has to be sort of like in a national context. And if in the national context there are lots of doubts to implement, then that's of course the case. And that's sort of like what teacher unions will have to sort of like stand for. At least that's probably where we're going to end up. So hopefully I can agree with both, if you don't mind. I think one more.
Yeah, I just want to say something concerning the Zambian situation. In our situation, we are part of the Teaching Council of Zambia as unions, and we ensure that since we are part of it, we go together with government officials to go and carry out inspections with them to see what the teachers are doing out there, whether they are maintaining the standards or they are moving out of the standard that has been set in terms of teaching and learning. And then also we look at issues of the conduct of the teachers when they're in class, their behavior and so on. So all those things, we do them together. And these things, they're not just done from maybe from without. These things are done within the law, because there is a Teaching Profession Act that has been enacted in our country, which has set standards, which has also said which type of people are supposed to be sitting on the Teaching Council of Zambia. So there are those standards that have been set. Otherwise, as teachers, we are deep in the Teaching Council of Zambia to see that we regulate the conduct and also the teaching and learning processes in our country.
Thanks. Yeah, so we're gonna sort of like have all these different case studies, sort of like lift them out as well, and the good ones and the bad ones, and they will also sort of like inform what the guidelines will. Yeah, and there's going to be a session tomorrow as well. So Larry's going to talk about that from Scotland, and some other. Pasi is going to talk about it. You can wrap that, sort of like mention it in a minute. I'd like to finalize it with one poll question, and then we're going to move on to dinner and drinks. It's a similar kind of question, and this one there's no choice. You have to make a choice, and we didn't put other in it. So what kind of organization should run the development and implementation of professional standards? Is it teacher unions, a government body with appointed teachers, so no elected teachers, a government body with elected teachers, or a mix of unions and governments? And if you could finalize that poll, I know there are all these different. It's already up? Oh, yeah. Okay, definitely a mix, and I think in most cases this is the case as well. So we're going to wrap it up. Can I get the PowerPoints back? Yeah. So thank you very much. Before I hand it over to David again, could you please, the ones who've been writing down the answers, hand it over to an EI staff person, or I think Martin's already coming around, and there are some other people here as well, so please hand them in. That was really helpful, so we're going to involve them or incorporate them in the final report we're writing right now. And that report will be presented at ResNet. Yeah, hand it over to David.
Thank you. Let's hear it for Jelmer and Martin, for yourselves. Oh. Who else is tired? Yeah? Okay. All right. So we started today with a Nobel laureate. We actually talked about yesterday sort of why we teach. Today we talked about what we teach. We got into the actual issues around, you know, the actual meat of it. You know, that it's not just enough about math and science. We talked with a frank conversation with Yuri, thank her for that, about some of the uses and misuses of PISA, and we will have an ongoing conversation about that. We had some workshops and some ed chats that were talking about the ways in which unions are working under some very difficult circumstances, how some partners are dealing with issues. And I think we also talked about how, if we're going to deliver on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly the global teacher target, we're going to need to help define what that means and hold governments to account in terms of delivering on that, in terms of qualifications, motivation, equal pay, all those kinds of things that we know matter, right? And then we just did this, which is part one of two parts. So tomorrow, the president of EI, Susan Hopgood, will lead a panel where we will be discussing the results, what you've been working on, to give ourselves some more framing for this process, this journey we're on, to think about how we create the conditions by which teachers themselves, teachers' unions, can lead the profession, so that private companies like Pearson can't come in and define what a teacher is. So Teach for All, Teach for America, Teach for Belgium can't come in and define for us who we are. So congratulations to you. I hope you're clapping for yourselves, because you just did some great work. It's really useful. We're going to be pulling this all the way through, okay? So thank you all very much. Just a few housekeeping notes to end this day. Today, the 4th of May, is Today is Remembrance Day in the Netherlands, where the victims of the Second World War are commemorated every year. So at 8 p.m. tonight, the entire country comes to a stop. And there is a 2-minute observance, 2-minute silence will be observed. If you're out on the streets heading to dinner, it's getting close to 8 o'clock, and all of a sudden you see everyone just sort of stop, That's what's happening. There will be Trudy was telling me there's going to be a remembrance actually right around here as well. But it's very, the Dutch people take this very seriously, as they should. And we happen to be here on the Remembrance Day, and so we want to make sure we're respectful in observing a moment that actually we all share. We have too many Remembrance Days. We have too many victims of war, and as war is raging around this world, we need to take a moment for silence, but we also then afterwards need to raise our voices and say enough and call for peace too. So let's keep that in mind. Your headsets, please leave on the table. I want to thank you all personally for staying all the way to the end. You know, this has been another very long day. I hope it has been useful for you. I hope that what you've heard resonates with you and what you're trying to do in your schools, in your union, in your countries as leaders. We will start back tomorrow at 9 o'clock, where Maggie MacDonnell, the Global Teacher Prize winner who you heard from yesterday, talked about her experience in a very isolated region. She will be followed by Pasi Sahlberg. I think many of you know our friend Pasi, who actually coined the term the Global Education Reform Movement, who has been a real champion of an alternate vision towards the neoliberal high-stakes testing, privatization, bash the teacher model. And he's going to be coming in, so I do hope you'll be here to hear Pasi, to share with Pasi, and then we're going to ask Pasi to join a panel where we're going to take these issues that you've been talking about. I understand it doesn't translate great across languages and contexts and cultures, but what does translate is our commitment to ensure that we defend our profession, we defend our members, we defend our students. Am I right? All right. Thank you all very much. I will see you tomorrow. Have a great evening. Thank you.